Welcome, everybody, to January 2017 Energy Lunch. Just like to quickly thank Steve Tucker from the Port of Port Townsend for the use of this room. And we don't have a speaker yet for February, but very excited to announce for March. Many of you longtime attendees will remember Ted Hollinger that came to talk about ammonia fuels. He's from a company, they're called HEC, the Hydrogen Energy Center. Now they're called HEC TINA, which is an acquisition from Spain, electrolyzer technology that they acquired. And someone from HEC TINA that's based in Bend, Oregon, I believe, Victor Cordell, is going to come talk to us about the hydrogen and ammonia applications for farms as well as for emergency preparedness. So look for that in March. Also want to remind you to please give it generously. Our sponsorships have kind of dwindled, and so we're hoping to continue the Energy Lunch, but we need your help. And today, as you're aware, our speakers are from Bainbridge, from Island Power, Steve Johnson and Jane Lindley, co-founders of Island Power, and they're the group that are leading the present political campaign for public power in the city of Bainbridge. Jane is the co-founder of Island Power and past president of Sustainable Bainbridge. Jane has volunteered for local nonprofits, including the Bainbridge Island Land Trust, nonprofits as Great Peninsula Conservancy, and the Arms Around Bainbridge. Jane authors her own website, Low Carbon Girl, which I checked out last night. It's a lot of fun. And she also works with Steve on island-power.org, so check out those two websites. Sorry, I have to read this. Steve retired in May 2010 after 23 years as executive director of the Washington Public Utility Districts Association. This Olympia-based trade association represents 27 Washington PUDs and Energy Northwest. In 2010, 3 Washington state counties, Jefferson, Skagit, and Island, had elections to establish PUD electric utilities. Johnson played a role in these campaigns. The Power Authority campaign won in Jefferson County, where the PUD is now serving the county with 97% carbon-free power. Johnson has extensive experience working on government and utility policies favoring renewables and conservation. He's a member of the City of Bainbridge Island Utility Advisory Committee. Prior to his position with the WPUDA, Johnson was the chair of the Political Science Department and associate professor of political science at the University of Alaska in Anchorage. And he is also a Vietnam vet. So with that, I would like you to welcome Steve and Jane.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting us to be part of your Energy Lunch. My name, as Sonia mentioned, is Jane Lindley, and Steve Johnson and I co-founded our Friends of Island Power campaign. I'm going to talk a little bit about our motivation for starting it. Steve's going to talk a little bit about the benefits of public power. And we do happen to have a surprise bonus person. Commissioner Ken Collins is going to speak for just a few words on the Washington policy brief that you might have seen about Jefferson PUD. So pretty excited. I'm excited to hear about that. So anyway, how this all started, simply enough. Now, I don't know about you, but I never really thought that much about electric utilities. I mean, you flick on a switch, the lights come on, it all works. Why change a thing? Well, you guys actually know the answer to this, but I didn't at the time. So that's what I thought until 3 things happened. The first thing that happened is that after 2 years of trying to reduce my carbon footprint and writing about it in my blog, Low Carbon Girl, I realized it's very hard to make a substantial difference with lifestyle changes. And it's not as though I didn't try. Oh, I tried. I did all sorts of stuff. Like I turned off my hot tub, and I love my hot tub. But after 2 years of making all sorts of changes, I realized I couldn't get my carbon footprint down below about 2 tons of CO2 a year. Now, it's estimated that we generate between 10 and 14 tons of CO2 a year, just our lifestyles. And you can see how quickly this adds up, what with vacation travel and commuting and heating our homes and eating and packages coming back and forth from Amazon. So while I was starting to realize I needed to do something other than lifestyle changes, it didn't really hit home until the second thing happened. The second thing that happened is that I looked into buying an electric car. Why? To reduce my carbon footprint. But I realized I'd be plugging into a grid that delivered about 60% of its energy from fossil fuels. And not just from any old fossil fuels either, but 35% of that comes from coal. And not just from any old coal mine either, but from Colstrip, Montana, one of the top 10 carbon emitters in the US. Not just the Northwest, but the entire US, top 10. Wow. So here's the kicker. Coal is the nation's top source of CO2 emissions. Excess CO2 emissions are the primary cause of climate change. You can see my conundrum. So, oh my goodness, and now I'm going to forget where I'm headed next. So I started to think, what if? I didn't know how it was possible. I didn't know if it was possible. I just started to think, what if we could fill our entire grid with carbon neutral electricity? Because it was clear to me that lifestyle changes weren't going to be enough, that the very systems we use every day would need to change. Systems so integrated in our lives that we barely notice them. That's when the third thing happened, and I met Steve Johnson. Who's Steve Johnson, you ask? Well, Steve Johnson's the former executive director of the Washington Public Utility District Association. And he showed me how it's possible to fill our grid with carbon neutral electricity, as well as some other benefits of public power. Since I met Steve, I have learned a whole lot about electric utilities. I have to say, at first, I thought the whole public power thing was a little fringe. I mean, who does this anyway? Then I realized there are examples of public power all around us, from Seattle City Light, Tacoma, Orcas Island, Ellensburg, Port Angeles, and Jefferson PUD. So then I started to think, how come Bainbridge Island isn't leading the charge on this? There are a ton of environmental stewards here. Why aren't we doing this public power thing? That's when we decided to start our campaign, Friends of Island Power, to see if public power is right for Bainbridge Island. And I have to say, you guys have been a source of inspiration, so keep up the good work. And now I'm going to hand things over to Steve.
Well, thanks, Jane. She's one of the best things to come out of this project is meeting Jane. You know, she called me out of the blue and said that somebody had told her that if she was going to do this getting off the carbon grid and all that, she had to talk to me. So it's been about 2 years, and we've become good friends and working hard on this project to do on Bainbridge Island what you've done here. And you were an inspiration to us, certainly, and we're doing pretty well. So right now, about a year and a half ago, we took 1,200 signatures to the City Council asking them to put this issue on the ballot. And they, I think, appropriately said, well, wait a minute, before we put it on the ballot, we ought to do a feasibility study. So they've got to pick a firm out of 5 firms, a firm that's actually worked for Jeff PUD in the past and did your feasibility study, D. Hiddle, and that draft study is due out as we speak. So that's going to be very interesting because I think the PSE is going to put its own spin on that, and they've already tried very hard to discredit this company that's doing a feasibility study for Bainbridge. Is this a good business deal for Bainbridge to get into the power business itself? So let's plunge right into this. And so why public power for Bainbridge? Next slide, please. Well, I guess I already told you that you know some of the benefits here of local control, those kinds of things, but particularly for Jane and I, the environmental issue, climate change is a real a reality for us that threatens our future, and so that's a big reason. But there are other reasons, including economic benefits for the community, reliability, which is terrible, and local control. So I love this picture here. This was commissioned by the Bonneville Power Administration years ago. It's a picture of some important leaders of the time campaigning for the 1930 PUD, Public Utility Districts legislation for the state. And following that, there were struggles in 29 counties who voted in public power, and the major motive was economic. Power was expensive, and in particular, rural areas were not being served. About 12% of farms in 1929 had electricity, so a lot of farms had no electricity. Next slide, please. So this is not a crazy idea. 55% of the state of Washington is served by public power. This map, somebody suggested that I just get this and have it all one color. These colors this is a Bonneville Power Administration developed map, mean different things. Some of these are co-ops, some of these are PUDs. These are all public power utilities. Some are cities like Seattle and the municipal utilities. And but anyway, it shows the geographic extent of these utilities that serve 55% of the state on a non-profit basis as public power. I can see it's a little dated there, and a lot of these maps, counties kind of reflect your situation. I don't think there are many lines up here on the top of Mount Olympus and so on, but your service is concentrated in here. And as you can see, by the way, that Clallam is serving some of your counties, so is Grays Harbor PUD, and so is Mason 1, I think, right? So your neighbors are serving some of the county. Next slide, please. So these are an example of some of the utilities on Bainbridge. We would be a municipal utility. That's the model that works for us. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And so the examples are cities bigger than the city of Bainbridge Island or Seattle, Tacoma, and Richland. But there's a whole lot of very successful public power utilities that are smaller, including Port Angeles in this area, which does a great job serving their community up there. And as you all, many of you know, what makes this work for these smaller utilities is mutual aid agreements. So the biggest sort of mutual aid agreement is all the public power dams on the Columbia and Snake River are coordinated to run those rivers as if there were one utility to optimize production. So it's a big and important agreement, but mutual aid agreements, particularly in restoring service in storms and so on, is a very important part of what makes it possible for small communities to have public power utilities that are successful. So next slide, please. So I grew up actually right on the boundary of Silicon and Lakewood in the South Sound area, and but I used to spend time there. I used to ride my bike down to the dock there and fish and so on. And it's a great little utility. It's a kind of a no drama utility. They just do a terrific job for the community, and they have bills 50% less than PSE. We're not pushing the rate issue as part of the reason for doing this on Bainbridge Island, but part of what makes that possible is they've been in business for about 100 years. They completely paid off their system. So great utility, 4 employees, 20 mutual aid agreements. Next slide, please. So Jefferson PUD, by the way, I'm going to say some things about the PUD that I bet are wrong here, so some of you can correct me, but this is what I've been telling others on Bainbridge Island about you. In 2008, there was a vote here to authorize the PUD. I was actually up here working for the PUD Association and did, I hope, some help on that. But it passed here and it failed in 2 other counties that same year. And so these numbers, I think I'm going to not mention these because this one might be off. This one might be off a little bit, but importantly, my understanding from previous conversations or documents up here is that now you have your own employees in the county and so on. You have that wonderful effect of keeping jobs in the county that you didn't have before. You've had some teething problems. I'm sure you all can talk about that. And at least in 2016, for that year, your bills were less than PSE, and now you're into a new situation. But that I believe, and Commissioner Ken Collins and I were talking earlier, that out into the future, your rates are not going to be perceptibly higher than Puget Sound Energy and all the benefits you'll get. But next slide, please. So the Bonneville Power Administration is the supplier. Again, a lot of you may know how this all works, but they're a great partner for most of the public power systems, because most of the public power systems in Washington State are all requirements customers of Bonneville. So they don't just deliver you the power, they shape it and do all kinds of things that you don't have to do locally. And they're a major transmission provider. They are the major transmission provider with 75% of the high voltage transmission that serves this community and serves Puget Sound Energy's power that comes from Montana comes on Bonneville lines, and lines that run all the way down into California. So that power is 97% cost-free, cost-based rates in a great New Deal history. The Bonneville was part of the Columbia Basin project that had purposes other than producing low-cost electricity, irrigation, flood control, and those kind of things. So in my view, it's one of those great success stories like the Tennessee Valley Authority. This map is the drainage of the Columbia Snake River system. What's sort of missing from this map is actually the Columbia River runs up into Canada about there and comes back down, and there are 3 dams built up there that are public power dams managed by BC Hydro, but paid for by the ratepayers in the Northwest, and what was actually a good deal. Next slide, please. So Puget Sound Energy, Macquarie Capital. So you won't find this on PSE's website, but they're owned by Macquarie Capital out of Sydney, Australia. That's kind of like Bain Capital. It's a complex system wherein Macquarie has put together some pension funds and so on, foreign pension funds, and those funds paid for them to buy out for $5 billion the company in 2008. I was around at the time, and one motivator here, there were these great local heroes like Bill Wise and Steve Ham, who sadly has passed away, and there were some savvy business types who said, if you're going to sell to this foreign corporation, why not sell to us? We'll pay you a higher price. We'll have a local utility. So as I understand it, that was one of the motivations. PSE Macquarie's rates and bills are 25% above the state average. Reliability across the state is below average. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And for Bainbridge, there are no island-based crews, so somewhat similar to you. You didn't have the crews that restored systems, as I understand it up here. You had a couple employees of PSE that did some kind of connections and things like that. But essentially, you had no operational folks here. And of course, the operational folks has mainly been outsourced to a contractor called Patelco, so they're not employees of PSE Macquarie. Next slide, please. So there's a lot to read about Macquarie Capital and how they operate. They're an infrastructure company that works around the world, but they're a very profitable company, and of course, rates customers at PSE pay, are the way that money is developed. Next slide, please. So PSE Macquarie is fossil fueled. We already heard about Colstrip in Montana. PSE is making a big deal about plans to shut down 2 older units. There's 2 more units, and the plan right now is to transfer operation to these possibly more efficient units, but they're still part of that coal plant complex. So we're yet to hear those kinds of deals, but they're publicizing a lot that they'll shut that down. Now the question is, does that affect the fossil fuels that are being, or the carbon that's being dumped into the atmosphere that Jane talked about? Well, all the outside observers say that PSE's plan to replace that at best will be with natural gas fired generation. And it's made, there's an organization, sister company called Macquarie Energy, operates in North America now, and is the fourth largest gas trader. I think that's in North America, not U.S. So they have close ties, and their current CEO, Kimberly Harris, is vice chair of the American Gas Association. And finally, PSE's Integrated Resource Plan has them not getting off fossil fuels until 2049. So here's kind of a graphic comparison of Washington State utilities. These are the three investor-owned utilities. This is one public power utility that has a gas turbine. And the rest of these are utilities that essentially have no generation of their own or no Bonneville generation that's fossil fuel fired. So that's a great thing, and that's why we on Bainbridge ought to become customers of the Bonneville Power Administration. Next slide, please. So this just gives you an idea of the attitude of the company. It's currently suing to overturn the state clean air rule, restrictive of their operations, and they're opposed to it. So that's the nature of the company that's talking about and sells to folks a green power option where you pay more on your bill. But actually, the green power credits that they sell don't change the mix of the power that serves the community. It has them, buying renewable energy credits from other places and so on. So I'm not saying it's without impact, but it costs customers who are already paying some of the highest rates more money to have that so-called green power, but it doesn't affect the actual power that comes to serve Bainbridge Island and formerly came here. Next slide, please. So, island economics, what's our power bill? We estimate that our power bill is $22.2 million a year, so that's the money that goes off the island. They have one employee on Bainbridge Island. That employee is a public relations type person. The crews are based in north of Poulsbo and have to come, as they used to here, across a bridge to serve the island, and so service is not very good. So I've asked sometimes, did folks know, next slide, please there, next one. Well, there we go. It's giving away the story that we had 11% rate increase in December of 2015. So throughout 2016, there's $2.4 million in additional money taken off of Bainbridge Island to no benefit to the island that we can perceive. And yeah, that's where we are. That's a significant impact on our community that very few people know about. I know you know about rate increases here in Jefferson County. I read in the newspaper, you have hearings well attended by the public. What you do is under a lot of scrutiny, what the PUD does, and so on. And but most people on Bainbridge Island, maybe today, don't know that PSE implemented this rate increase. So we estimate that public power, in a similar fashion to what's happened in Jefferson County, about $5 million a year would stay on the island if we had our own crews, employees, and operations. Next slide, please. Outage and reliability. So this is terrible on Bainbridge Island. Next slide, please. So first, the PSE serves 8 counties. It used to be 9 counties. Jefferson would be off here, but and we have the outage data because they have to report it to the Utilities and Transportation Commission. They won't. It's been difficult to get that data just for Bainbridge, but we're in Kitsap County, and Kitsap is the worst by far of the counties in terms of the frequency of outages. These are the other counties they serve. Next slide, please. The duration of outages, again, we do have some data for Bainbridge, but it's this is how long folks are out. And if you compare us, the worst performing utilities are about a third, less than a third of the duration of outages we endure there. Clallam PUD here is doing a pretty darn good job, and they're you know, of the other publics, they're that's where they are. It's 1/3 the duration of outages, and we picked these utilities to try and have ones that have similar service areas, in other words, wooded and so on. So not the cities like City of Ellensburg, City of Port Angeles. They have very low outage incidents, but they don't have the trees and so on. And but this is a very fair comparison here, where Snohomish PD is at about 1/5 the duration of outages, using exactly the same data type format. So not good. Next slide, please. So better broadband on Bainbridge. Now this is one I got to be careful about. I'm an enthusiast about public power being a path to better broadband service. We have some of the island is very poorly served with broadband, yet probably similar to you, we have a large workforce that works from home and very much dependent on the internet to do what they do. Thanks to in the year 2000, PUD's got authority. There's a big battle in the state legislature. We took on the telecom companies and got the wholesale authority that Jeff PUD now has. But Grant PUD was one of the leaders in launching that and implementing it, and has the distinction, this may be dated a little bit, of the highest speed internet connections in Ephrata, Washington, in the US of A. So, but not over-promising on where we might go with broadband, but this could be a path to improve broadband. Next slide, please. So type of island utility, theoretically, we could be a PUD that's virtually impossible. Theoretical, but virtually impossible, because Kitsap PUD, who at the moment is not interested in doing this, would have to dissolve itself in order for the county to have more than one PUD in the county. So that doesn't work. Electric cooperatives are a very intriguing option, and we have examples, and we have a retired cooperative manager here in the audience today. But these are Orcus Power and Light and other cooperatives do a great job in the state. They really have the kind of spirit of community service. That's theoretically an option for us, but more likely is a municipal utility like Port Angeles and Seattle. Now, on Bainbridge Island, the city has a bad reputation. I think it's very much dated. They had problems with their water system and all of this going through the crisis. They were organized as a city only 25 years ago. Seems like forever. And so a lot of people have cautioned us, well, public power might be good, but not the city. And so because we think in the end this is probably the model that's going to work for us, we have some hopes that there's a way we could do this, but it's be legally much more complicated. Board management utility. So in other words, we have a dedicated board with significant autonomy and authority, such as some other public power utilities. In the public power industry, I used to go to all these meetings. The managers like this model a lot because you don't have so much interference by the city council and confusion of the other important things the city does with the utility. So this is the model we're talking about right now. Next slide, please. So the electric board, again, would have professional management and have an understanding that the board members would have certain skills and so on. And of course, we'd have island-based crews, mutual aid agreement with other utilities, and all the other benefits of public power, like open meetings. Next slide, please. So the power company says risky, risky, risky. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt is the strategy they used here to try and block this community from getting public power. They don't talk much about how they do a better job or what, that kind of thing. It's mainly risk. This is a risky endeavor. Well, you know, in our lives, there's what are the risks of doing nothing versus change? And it turns out, I believe, that it's significantly riskier to stay with PSE Macquarie than it is to so have our own public power utility on the island. And in these uncertain times, nationally, local control may mean we can do things locally that are going to be not working so well at the national level, or may be rolled back, particularly with respect to climate change, regulating coal plants, and that kind of stuff. So I guess that's the climate risk here. With PSE, it's still high. I think they're going to remain, they're going to continue to spew out a lot of carbon far into the future. These are the credit ratings for PSE and Macquarie Capital are not particularly good, and that really translates too into the cost of operations. Cities, you know, they're all, you know, throughout Washington, and the public power PUDs have high credit ratings. Wall Street likes their financing and bonds and so on. Carbon tax risk, I don't know where we are. That's probably, given some new developments, faded somewhat, but it was on the national agenda and had the, a thing we ought to do, had this risk of raising rates, but if public power, like your community, we are not exposed to that carbon tax risk because our power is carbon free. And then business venture risk, just for a lot of reasons, staying with a company, reading the business literature about Macquarie and where that company might go, and looking at the success of public power. There's never been, with all this history we've had, a public power system that has failed, gone bankrupt, or sold back. In fact, there's never anybody, even here in this county where you're, you know, having some teething problems. I don't know. You tell me if there's any serious interest in going back to being served by PSE, and whether that would make any sense. It's just not going to happen. So that's the risk analysis I've done. Next slide, please. So here are the reasons for Bainbridge. It's all about our future. Climate, the thing that got Jane launched on, caused her to launch this project. Economics, we're not promising lower rates, but we're promising a lot of economic advantage to having our own utility, including keeping money in the community. Reliability, it's currently really intolerable. We had a manager of Ellensburg Electric at a workshop this weekend, and he said, I'd be fired if I was responsible for operations here, you know, and with the poor reliability that's on Bainbridge Island and in much of the PSE system across the state. And then there's local control, which you know about, a chance to use this very important entity, vital to the economy, vital to the community, to structure our future and do things in the way in which we want to do, and not be dictated by how that's done in Bellevue or some other place where the company is. Next slide, please. So that's it. Here's our website. Here's our Twitter connection, and here's our Facebook address. So with that, I think we're going to hear from Ken Collins, Commissioner Ken Collins.
The first thing I want to say is that I am speaking here as an individual and not speaking either on behalf of the Jefferson PUD or the other commissioners. I think that Steve and Jane have done an excellent job in terms of laying out the groundwork, all the compelling reasons. The reason I'm up here is to comment specifically on an article that was published by the Washington Policy Center. And Steve had contacted me and asked me if I would write a rebuttal, because they said a number of things about Jefferson PUD which are flatly inaccurate, and it reached me on an emotional level. So I took the time to write a rebuttal, and what's clear to me is that we're now apparently living in the post-factual age, when people can make statements, for example, about the difference in rates between JPUD and PSC without ever looking on the websites to make a comparison, because the fact is that for most of last year, we were about $6 less than PSC. The other thing that struck me about this policy brief from the Washington Policy Center was that they talked about the survey that we did a year ago. And what struck me about it was that they commented without obviously ever looking at the actual survey, because there was a specific question in the survey that asked people to compare their satisfaction with the service they were receiving from either PSC or Jefferson PUD. And 41% of the people had really no opinion. The reason for that being that, we got a lot of new people moving in who didn't have a basis for comparison, and I think a lot of people simply didn't identify a difference. But among the people who did identify a difference, 58% said they were getting better service from Jefferson PUD. So on the website, or it will be shortly on the website, is my full rebuttal to the Washington Policy Center article. And I would certainly hope that that lends support to what these folks are doing, because certainly the benefit to Jefferson County is substantial. One data point on the slides, which I would like to correct: by the end of 2017, we'll be up to approximately 50 jobs. That is a 1,000% increase from when PSC was providing electrical service. And the vast majority of people in Jefferson County, it's not true of all of the outlying areas, but for the vast majority of people, the length of time that it takes for one of our trucks to reach an outage is about 40-45 minutes less than it takes, than it used to take for the trucks to come over from Paulsbo, and that's assuming that the bridge was open, because that would add significantly. So I appreciate being able to add a few comments, and as I said, I'm here as an individual. And one thing that in making that disclaimer, one thing I want to add that wasn't stated: you not only have local control, what you have is transparency, because we as commissioners cannot take any action outside of an open public meeting. Our meetings are all recorded. You can access it on the Jefferson PUD website. And I think that's not only more transparent, also a lot more accessible than having the locus of control being in Australia. Thank you very much.
Just had a comment since the name was brought up. To call the Washington Policy Center, maybe you can explain. As I understand, this is a privately funded endeavor.
Ken maybe give an explanation of that.
It's because the name sounds public.
By the way, I so much appreciate Ken engaging on this, because the target of this study is not you guys. I don't think they ever anticipate coming back here or whatever. So while they trash Jeff PUD, their purpose is to block what's going on in Bainbridge. So one of the first things they did is send all the city council members and so on in the community. So that was their purpose. And Ken has done such a great job of responding to that within the limits of, appreciate it. Maybe, Ken, you're the person to answer this question.
I went to their website, and I don't necessarily believe in guilt by association, but when you look at a group that is opposed to the Affordable Care Act, opposed to public transportation, opposed to the minimum wage, you begin to see a bit of a trend. And what you also see is they're a member of a group that is funded by the Koch brothers. So I'm not saying that they get direct funds that way, but they're part of a group. So it's clear that they have an agenda, and it actually surprised me as to how little actual research the writer did, because had he gone to the website, had he bothered to talk to the general manager of JPUD, had he talked to a commissioner, had he cared to write a balanced article, the information was out there, but that was never their intention.
I've been to some PUD meetings in Jefferson County, and I had questions because I ran into a resistance. This is kind of like my harebrained scheme to bring clean energy to the United States of America. What they were saying was BPA produced power very cheaply, and there was a disincentive to installing local capacity because BPA could take care of all comers. What I wanted to do was enable local control and local capacity, and then have BPA shoot the clean energy from our hydroelectric system over to the markets back east where they're dominated by dirty energy, but my great Occupy people are knocking out the coal plants more and more every day. And I am asking y'all to think about this. We need a much more nimble, fast-moving, responsive grid than we have right now. And the main blockades we have to that are institutional. Because when I have Hawaii saying we're going to have a moratorium declared by the utilities on putting in solar tech, I know I've got a problem. When I got a fight in New York, Colorado, saying, well, we'd all like to go solar, and the utility says no, and they go into a statewide effort to push that forward, I know I've got a utility-based, fossil fuel-based problem. And that's what we have to overcome. And I got a state right now that wants to outlaw clean energy top down. How's that for insanity? And there it is right there. What you said was, every time they come up with their emotionalized, hateful, unresearched position, you knock it out with the facts. And that's what you're going to have to do with everything, not just clean energy. Everything they attack you on, you have to be ready to come up with the facts and knock them down on the position. And that's how you get your future back.
Thanks.
One problem we had here.
Thanks a lot.
One more question.
Was there a question?
One more thing. Yeah, there is actually.
Oh, okay.
What is Jeff PUD going to do about increasing energy subsidies for the poor people in the county?
In today's Peninsula Daily News, there's an article specifically addressing that. Recently, the Board of Commissioners passed a resolution setting aside up to $500,000, and all of the details are not worked out. However, what it's looking like now is that for people up to 125% of the federal poverty level, they'll get a rate reduction in the neighborhood of 60%. And for those from 125 to 175, the reduction will be 30%. In addition to the fact that the customer service reps have worked very, very hard to dramatically reduce the number of people subject to power shutoffs.
Yeah, well, here they're hostile. I've got commissioners that are hostile to the idea of subsidizing power for poor people. It's an institutional viciousness that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, I was talking to a local contractor, and he said he liked the PUD because they got they had better service, but he says the big thing was that they can only, on a hookup, they can only charge the amount that it actually takes. They can't add a profit margin on top of it. Is that true? That if you make a hookup, say you have to go 1,000 feet, you can only charge the amount that it actually costs instead of what you feel that the customer can afford to pay?
Unfortunately, I'm not involved on that level, so I'm going to plead ignorance on that and say that you can either talk to Jim Parker or Kevin Street at the PUD, and he can better, either one of them can better answer that question than I can.
The contractors appear to be happy.
The way I worked for the utilities and with public power, I mean, your service people don't go out there and they say, this is how much it's going to cost. That's what they say. There's tremendous pressure within the company to push that number up. And and a lot of PUD or a lot of PSE employees will tell you about that at the local level when you're dealing with them. They're just under a lot of pressure to create a profit or sell you more than you really want to buy. So you're right about that advantage of public power being cost-based, and presumably the folks who work for Jeff PUD are not being rewarded for increasing the cost for you to have a connection.
Just a question about BPA. I mean, is there capacity sufficient to take on a number of other efforts like the one you are doing? And what is known about the future of the BPA? Could it, for instance, be privatized?
Well, those are good questions. Prior to Jeff PUD being organized, so Bonneville 12 years ago looked around and its customers and said, we're out of this vintage low-cost power. We're going to have to start buying new renewables. And by the way, by law, they're committed. They have to go there first for conservation first, then renewables to get power. The customers said, we're not sure we want you to do that. You're going to raise rates, meld it in. It doesn't set you good conversation. So let's take all of the power you've got and allocate it out to the current customers. So this is a great deal for them. That they would be capped on the amount of power they'd get, but if Snohomish PUD got so much power, it would get that sort of in perpetuity. It would actually be a slice of the system, so things might change a bit, but that Grand Coulee power and so on. They said, well, what about new publics? And there was some pressure on them to say, forget it, we're out of power. But they decided to set aside 250 megawatts for new publics. So not a lot of power. You took advantage of that. So now they're down, and then there's a tribal utility called the Yakima Power. It took 10 megawatts or something like that. So I think they're at 190 megawatts. But this is tier one, low-cost vintage power. It's lowest cost power available in the United States. And once you get it sort of in perpetuity. So we're after that, and we're saying to our community, there's 3 communities in Oregon looking at public power for this reason. They got some industrial customers. Ultimately, that power is going to be gone. But right now, we have the ability, and probably if we get our act together, we'll be able to get our 30 megawatts or whatever of that low-cost power. Bonneville, there were efforts, explorations during the Reagan administration of privatizing that federal agency. I think as a practical matter, it's not going to happen. The benefits it delivers here are so huge, and the congressional delegation here, Republicans or Democrats, to disrupt that agency would be difficulty. Now, who knows? With the new national government, privatization is something that could be on their agenda. And during the Reagan years, a lot of that was the profit that would flow back to the national treasury, including then another scheme they had is to jack up the rates in the Northwest because we have the lowest net rates around the nation and so on. So I think we may hear some about that. I kind of have confidence that would never actually come off, but it's a risk, particularly, with Donald Trump being elected president. Who knows what would happen in terms of privatizing land and these wonderful federal assets.
I wanted to talk. I'm from Clallam PUD, and we before we hook up a major customer, we send a customer rep out there to actually estimate what the cost would be. And there's no pressure on them to increase or decrease. They have special rates and how they factor all. So if it's a 100-foot hookup, it'll cost one way. But if it's a 1,000-foot hookup, it'll be by foot and it'll be another way. So we try to make everything, we don't try to see how much we can get off of it. It's based on what it actually costs to do it. So there is no way to try and say, can we add extra onto that or subtract from it? Go ahead.
Well, along those lines, one of your slides talked about cost-based rates.
Yes.
And that's a term that I don't think everyone in the room really would understand. I'm not sure if people have that been part of this discussion in Bainbridge Island as far as what cost-based rates are versus what PSC does.
Well, it essentially means nonprofit. It says, what the power that's delivered us by Bonneville is based on the actual cost of productions and all of that kind of thing, and there is no profit added on. So I think in some ways, we for some reason that term is often used with respect to BPA and the federal wholesale power, but essentially that's what Jeff PUD does too. Those are cost-based rates. They take their cost. There's no profit, and by law they can't have a profit. And who would be the recipient of the benefits of that profit? So that's what it is.
So one other part of it.
Commissioner Hafner may have an answer as well for you.
Well, the interesting thing is last year, Bonneville raised the rate about 11% on power, but this year it only went up around 4%. And we had to raise our rates a little bit to cover, labor and the power costs and all that. But we only increased our rates about 3.5%. So Bonneville, I think, has gotten the message that they need to keep the costs down on a lot of this power, because that's what I'm hearing from some of our people. I go to some of the Bonneville meetings, is that Bonneville is getting the message that they can't keep raising the rates 11% each year, because that just means we have to raise the rates more, to cover that. So we do. It is, and it's what you said. It's cost based. If it only costs us 4% more for power, that's all we charge. We don't charge 11% just because we got away with it the year before.
Take a question right here.
Yeah, Barney Burke, I just want to add a comment on Bonneville, and I think what we did here is just terrific. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. But in Bonneville, they do their best, but they're a big federal agency, and I will say, because I've looked at these numbers in some depth, they are underfunded under long-term capital for transmission. Most of that system is very old, a lot of analog equipment. Like this gentleman's talking about integrating more renewables and so on. Well, you need a system that can make that work well. And there is investment going in on it, but they've made some lengthy presentations on here's their capital just for capital budget for maintenance, for improvements and so on, and this is how much money they have. There's a big gap there. So much as it's the best deal in the country, it's cheap, it's carbon free, you got to invest in that just as any utility does. You're constantly buying stuff. So that's the biggest challenge they face, in my opinion.
Pretty rickety though, isn't it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, several things going on. One, the system is 75 years old, much of it. You got a lot of analog equipment, and you have more demand on the system, more power, and then you have the more dynamics needed because of renewables that peak and drop off, and to make all of that work costs more money. It's a good problem to have, but it's something you have to invest in, and that's why Bonneville and Energy Northwest, which was mentioned earlier, have done a lot of work on demand response management, because that's a lot cheaper than building more transmission. But I just want to note that's a big challenge coming down the road, but I'd rather be on that train than a ratepayer at a system that is fed by Colstrip, Montana, for lots of reasons. So we're on the right track.
Actually, it's kind of a follow-up on that. I'm concerned about the stability of the Bonneville power and its transmission. I don't want us to be cheaping out. I see this as very vulnerable to, frankly, even terrorist disruption. Certainly, aging facilities. So I guess what's happening on these matters?
Well, maybe somebody else could offer something on that, but I worked for 23 years a lot with the Bonneville Power Administration, and I have to confess an admiration for that federal bureaucracy and their history. What they did, they electrified and helped develop this state, many regions of which were really kind of depressed. No electricity, the eastern Washington was a desert. Now it's a garden of agriculture and so on.
From here on.
Yeah, going forward. So one, I'd kind of bet on an agency that can borrow from the Treasury and has a credit rating higher than virtually any other utility. They are the Treasury. Treasury bonds finance them. They're in these uncertain times, including climate change, operations of the river are going to be different. We're going to get probably the same amount of water, but it's going to come down at the wrong time, not being stored as a kind of a battery of snow up there. So, but where are we better off with this public agency that listens to us through its customers in terms of coping with the future, or foreign-owned corporation whose interests diverge, particularly, say, about climate change? Fundamentally, the company will talk about that and sell you green credits over and above you're already paying some of the highest rates in the state. But where's their commitment to addressing this problem? So we're fortunate to have Bonneville and Yep. They're like any utility, they've got questions, raise your rates to upgrade the system and make those investments. There's all those dilemmas. But it's democratically controlled in that there's a customer organization called the Public Power Council. So your elected representatives and managers go to those meetings, and believe me, they have a great deal of influence over Bonneville and the decisions it makes.
Well, if a couple of comments. One, the concern about cyber and so on. Certainly, every utility looks at that as not really a solvable problem. My mind is something you constantly work on and you try to keep up with. But one other note on the financing of Bonneville. I know they're part of the Department of Energy. They have a very limited line of credit, if you will, from the federal government, and most of their capital they borrow from the federal government, they're paying about 7%. Now, who's paying 7%? A mortgage isn't 7%, but that's what Bonneville is charged under the Obama administration for money it borrows. What's going to happen after tomorrow, I have no idea, but Energy Northwest, and you might Google their website and learn about them because they're a consortium of utilities that not only runs the nuclear plant, the wind plant, and some other things, but serves the Bonneville customers. Energy Northwest, when I was on their board the last few years, we refinanced a lot of Bonneville's debt where they were paying 7%. Energy Northwest has perfect credit, back to your point earlier, and has gone to, pardon us, Wall Street and borrowed money really cheap and refinanced Bonneville's debt, save ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars doing that. So that's public power working together. So Bonneville is a good deal, and if someone tries to privatize it at some point, we should certainly guard against that. It's not in our interest, in my opinion.
So where are you in your process now? You're waiting for the feasibility study, and presumably part of that is estimating what it might cost to buy out PSE?
I don't know. It's not easy for me to answer that question, but we'll share. So it's been a long process because, unlike you, we didn't have the power. Our city doesn't have the power of initiative or referendum. So instead of being able to just collect a number of signatures and put this on the ballot, we have to go through the city council, and we basically have to convince them to write an ordinance, put it on the ballot. That's why they decided to start a feasibility study, because they wanted to educate themselves, which is great. And so where we are right now is we're waiting for that study to come out. If it comes out and it's favorable, they don't actually have to do anything. We will be there lobbying for them to move forward, but they could just be like, well, that's cool. We could do this if we want. Or they could write an ordinance by August and try to get it on the November ballot. Now, will it cost a lot to finance? We're sort of assuming it'll cost similar to what yours cost, $1 million or so to finance this, and it would be revenue bonds most likely. We don't know that we would be funded by the, we'd be able to get any kind of, I'm trying to think of the low cost, RUS, yeah, funding, but so that is our PSC's big campaign against our campaign, saying it's going to cost us too much, but they forget that it is a moneymaker, and it would be the biggest business on Bainbridge Island, and it would be continual. Everybody needs power, so that's the big benefit for us.
Our plan is to have this on the ballot in November of 2017. But as Jane said, unlike here, where the law prescribed that once you collected signatures and put this on the ballot, the PUD officials didn't have any ability to keep that vote from going forward. And once the vote that established you were in electric businesses, you would be authorized to be in the electric business now. The commissioners could have chosen to drag their feet in a number of ways. And some of this about the cost would be the cost of financing the actual purchase. So you paid somewhere in the range of a little bit more than $100 million for the system, which in the end, I think is not a bad deal for the community, but there's a lot of debate about whether you overpaid. We hope to pay less proportionally on Bainbridge, but that would be, $40 million, $50 million. But there's also the cost of getting to the point of establishing the utility, and PSE has already said they're going to sue the hell out of us and all of that. So that there'll be significant costs there, but there were for Jeff PUD, and as I understand, they were kind of recovered when you did the financing and got into business, but PUD used its resources and it's cost $1 million or $2 million for you to pay for legal costs and so
One
on.
other quick thing. Also, just quickly, Microsoft is, I don't know if you're following this at all, but a lot of the big corporations are looking to move away from the grid because they're not going to be able to meet their sustainability goals on the grid with PSE filling so much of it with fossil fuels. So they're looking to buy renewable energy on the market, not unlike Seattle City Light does. And Seattle City Light has been greenhouse gas free since 2005, so they've done a pretty good job. But one of their consultants, EES, is now making the case that PSE should pay Microsoft $15 to $30 million to leave the grid and take and buy their 50 megawatts of power themselves, because PSE is going to have to find other sources to fill their needs when they close down Colstrip, and it's going to be more expensive than Colstrip for them. So it's actually a benefit if some of us move, back away from PSE and move off the grid. I know.
I'm glad Tom asked how things are going, because the other thing I was thinking you probably want some feedback on your presentation.
Absolutely.
And to me, I would call it the outage level rather than reliability. Reliability is a positive statement. Outage level is a negative statement.
Yeah.
And I think across a residential customer base, which that's something everyone can experience. I can experience the outage. I can't experience the reliability. Mm-hmm. So on that basis, I would think the linguistics of it is important relative to getting through to people. Mm-hmm. People know when things have gone down. And on an economic level, and I'm thinking relative to Bali and business for local living economies, you have a lot of home businesses. They're probably economically more significant than some of our home businesses in terms of total revenues per year, just knowing some of the professional services that you provide there. I'm thinking that reliability factor for them is a big factor. When power goes out, business can't function in an internet-based economy. And so I think that's a big factor for your specific community.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for those comments.
I've been enjoying having a PUD, having public power here, and I'd like to say that one of the really wonderful things about it is that it expands your definition of self-interest. When you flip on the switch, you're responsible for whether or not your neighbor gets his power shut off. You're responsible for making sure that everybody can afford to have electricity. You're responsible for going to meetings and asking questions. You're now responsible for getting commissioners elected and trying to make a difference in your community. I think that's the biggest benefit I've found for having public power.
Thank you for that comment. Anybody else have any other comments, questions?
Are the Bainbridge people making that same offer that Microsoft made? Are you presenting the fact that that you actually will save PSE money?
Well,
It opens the
If they,
door.
if they,
it opens,
maybe they can pay your.
it opens that door. PSC has talked about a stranded asset charge. You know, Jeff PUD, you got out from under the cost of shutting down and restoration of the site for these coal plants. And so we face that. PSC has said publicly that we're going to have to pay for those so-called stranded assets. So even though we want to leave, that we'd actually have to pay some of the costs of those plants out into the future. So I'm optimistic because of what Jane reported, that in the end we would not have to do that. But it's one of the barriers they're throwing up as potential barriers and problems for us.
But if Microsoft is already, telling them, if Microsoft is doing it, that's good.
I know, and Facebook and Apple are following suit, so.
You know, this is sort of a sinking ship in some ways because they can't sell their coal. That's one of the reasons for their stranded assets. There really isn't a market right now for coal power because natural gas is cheaper. It used to be that coal was cheaper or as cheap, and the environmental and other reasons. So they have to have captive customers to be able to use this coal resource. They can force us to buy that power, but if we go off and they lay off 30 megawatts of generation there, or they want to continue, how do they sell it? Nobody's going to buy it.
Just a couple of quick comments. You'll notice that in 2008, some people said some bad paper was really good. And what they found was the ratings agencies, Moody's, was involved in saying that really bad paper was really good. What you're looking at is something that used to be fairly objective, getting very emotionalized and kind of desperate. So there's going to be these fiefdoms that say, well, certain stock is great and other stock isn't so great, and it's not going to be based on any serious research. And I hope that you're aware of that.
Thank you both for being here. It was great to have you, and we'll call it a day. Thank you.